23. What Porcini Found. "Time to get moving," Norrin said. Porcini stretched and stood carefully. His head hurt much less, which was good, and while his body was still sore from the slap of the water, it was nothing compared to yesterday's ache. He had slept through the night, and Norrin woke him at dawn. It was cold and windy again, and Porcini shivered. "You will warm up as we walk," Norrin told him with a slight smile. Porcini nodded, looking around. "Norrin, will we go back to Larkin's?" Warm beds and large meals sounded especially appealing right now. "Not today," Norrin said. "If we can make it there tomorrow, then yes, we will. It is on the other side of the river, however, and we won't cross unless we have to." They headed down the path, moving steadily southeast and following the river. The path on the west bank was wilder than the other road, a crumbling dirt road overgrown by briars. The woods reminded Porcini very much of the Wandering Wood, which was comforting to him. The desert and the rocky cliffs had been so different from the tall trees he was used to. He looked up at the wizard, who strode resolutely ahead. There was a calm resolve in Norrin's face that impressed Porcini. Even with this sudden change of plan, he still seemed completely in control. "Norrin," he began uncertainly, not sure if he should ask the question. Norrin glanced at him, and he continued, "Norrin, who were the Guardians of Gairal? I heard you mention them when Larkin first came." Norrin was silent, then nodded slowly. "I can tell you as we walk. The Guardians of Gairal were established shortly after the fall of the cruel queen Kirkadash, many years ago. Saphicon was not yet a threat, and at time of peace had filled the northern part of Orlell." "Peace?" Porcini repeated, surprised. "Then Saphicon hadn't created the objects yet?" "We think not. If he had not yet used them to take control," Norrin said. "The Guardians of Gairal were founded, as I said, shortly after the fall of Kirkadash. The Lisni people of Kuncia helped organize them as a measure of security to protect the Northern Isles. I was one of its founders, in fact, along with several others. For many years, we continued in our mission of protecting the Commonwealth and maintaining peace in Gairal." Porcini listened, very interested. "Then what happened to them?" He had a guess, and he already knew it was nothing pleasant. Norrin sighed heavily. "When Saphicon rose to power, he did it very carefully and methodically. Many people were fooled that he was nothing more than an especially eccentric politician, and followed him without thought. Saphicon had the jewel, and with it he made the servantiri. They forced the people into submission, forced them to obey his every order. The Guardians resisted and tried to fight, and he killed many of them." A shadow crossed Norrin's face, and he paused before continuing. "The surviving Guardians were forced to go into hiding and wait to bring down Saphicon's regime in secret. Some were right on the front lines, forming secret militias and such, like Rygel's father did. Others, like Larkin, remained in hiding, standing as a safe house for the insurgents." "But what about the Dyrans?" Porcini asked. "Couldn't they have stopped Saphicon? They have control of Gairal, don't they?" "Well, they do, in a way," Norrin said. "Gairilian politics are a bit complicated, Porcini. All of us answer to the High King of Kuncia, because Gairal is a Kuncian territory. But by the time people realized Saphicon was indeed a threat, it was too late. He had already taken control and sent his deputy Cato to the mainland, along with an army of immortal warriors." "Immortal?" "To a point. Those warriors were called the Hazes. They were, well, incomplete, as it were. Saphicon was still perfecting the enchantment. He never managed to complete that project, for the jewel was stolen from him before he could do more." Porcini thought this through. The story of Cato and the Hazes was not entirely unknown to him. Rigel had told him about that battle on the journey. He looked up at Norrin again. "Then, once we beat Saphicon, do you suppose the Guardians will return?" "I hope so," Norrin said with a half-smile. "Rigel has been recruiting loyal and fierce warriors almost as soon as he returned from the battle with Cato. Once Saphicon is gone, the Guardians can be re-established, and we can begin helping the Commonwealth again." "And my father's tribe can help," Porcini said. "The Chantrell tribe. They can help the Guardians too." He wasn't entirely sure how all the politics worked, and he knew that the brownie tribes had fought against the humans over territory for years. But now, with Safakon as a common enemy, they were allies. Norin stopped abruptly, his brow furrowed. Persini looked at him in confusion. "What is it?" The wizard's face was puzzled and a little worried. "It's here. It's close. How did we miss it?" he was murmuring to himself. "What?" Persini asked, a little concerned now and wondering if Norin was starting to go crazy. Norin turned slowly, looking at the river. "It's very close. Yes, this is the place where Deathcap fought for it, and it fell in the river." He turned sharply, gripping Persini's shoulders, his face suddenly elated. "What?" Persini started again, alarmed. "It's very near, Persini," Norin said in a hushed tone, his face showing great excitement. "How on Orlell did I not notice it before? No matter. This is the place. I am sure of it, and I can feel it." "You can feel what?" Persini asked. "The ring, of course. The ring of light. I can sense it. When Deathcap last fought for it, this was the place where we fought, and the ring fell into the river." Norin turned towards the swirling water, eyes alight and scanning the banks. "But where is it?" Persini asked excitedly. "I am not sure. Still in the river, most likely. We may have to wade." Persini's heart sank a little at that. It was a chilly morning, and the idea of being wet was not appealing. But Norin was so excited that he hated to let him down. "All right, what should I do?" They moved towards the water. Norin was pacing up and down the bank, like a dog catching a scent on multiple breezes of wind. "Close, closer," he muttered to himself, pausing every now and then. Finally he stopped, looking straight out in the water. With the rain a few days before, the river was deep and full, churning brown. "It is in this stretch of river. Whether it is close to the banks or in the center, I am not sure." "What if it's in the middle?" Persini asked worriedly. Neither of them would be able to swim out there and dive for something as small as a ring. The water would be too murky to see anything. "We'll start with the shallows. We might have time to—" Norin stopped abruptly, looking upstream. His face had suddenly gone pale. Persini followed his gaze and felt his heart sink. 4 shapes reeled in the air, getting closer to them. "The Servantiri," he whispered, hearing the eerie cries of the dragons. "Get back," Norin warned, and they huddled back in the shadows of the trees. Persini watched as the group flew closer. He realized, suddenly, that the Servantiri would be able to sense the ring's reawakened magic, too, and the dragons could dive for it. Norin stood, clutching his staff, looking like he was thinking hard. "We cannot let them get it. We need to stop them." "How?" Persini whispered. The dragons swept low over the river, hovering over the water. Persini could see the Servantiri peering into the murky river, excitement in their hollow blue eyes. Norin stepped forward. "I will distract them. You must watch the water. If the ring is washed close to shore, it will be up to you to grab it and flee." Persini looked at him in shock. "Washed to me? But what do I do with it? What about you?" "You'll be all right. Keep to the trees." Norin moved forward onto the shoreline. The Servantiri seemed to be trying to convince the dragons to dive into the frigid water. The dragons, clearly not interested in this option, hovered uncertainly above the surface. Norin stood on the shore, the river lapping at his boots, and waited. The Servantiri saw him first. Persini watched them straighten, then point at the wizard. They reined the dragons up sharply, then charged. Norin sent a ray of crackling yellow light from the end of his staff, creating a line between himself and the Servantiri. The warriors stopped, the dragons reeling over the river, snarling. Persini watched, not sure what to do. Norin stood erect, as if he could feel some powerful force rising from wherever the ring was. Then he lowered his staff again and struck the water directly by the shoreline, just as the dragons lunged forward. A cloud of steam shot up as the staff touched the water. In an instant, Norin and the warriors vanished from view into the cloud. Persini could see flashes of dragonfire, met here and there by sparks. "Norin!" he called fearfully. The wizard couldn't possibly beat them all on his own, but he wouldn't leave until he had the ring safely away from the Servantiri. Persini steeled himself, forgetting his fear, and stepped toward the river edge. The cold water lapped at his toes. He took a deep breath and then dove. The cold took his breath away as the water closed around his body. He surfaced, gasping and sputtering, then dove again. The fog and murky water made it almost impossible to see anything. Persini swam down until he touched the rocky bottom and began crawling his way along, feeling for anything. There was a muffled crash up above, then a mighty splash. Persini surfaced, taking a deep breath, and stared in shock and awe. One of the dragons, its great hide burned and slashed, floated a few feet away from him. Its rider rose up out of the water inches from Persini's face, the skull-like eyes boring into his own. Persini shouted and leapt back, heart pounding. The Servantiri looked around, then dove into the water. It could sense the ring. It would get to it before he did. "No!" Persini yelled, and plunged into the water again. The glowing blue eyes of the Servantiri lit the murky water as it clawed through the rocks into the mud. Persini gripped its wrist in his paw and pulled it back. It struck at him, knocking him back up to the surface. Persini took a huge gulp of air and then plunged back into the freezing water. The Servantiri's face bore a look of excited triumph. The ring was close at hand. Persini struck at it hard as he could through the water, knocking it back, and clutched at the mud for something to use as a weapon. His hand found only a fistful of soft mud. In a moment, the Servantiri returned, flinging Persini out of the water with its artificial strength. Persini crashed into the muddy water by the bank, coughing and shivering. The steam had cleared. He could see the other Servantiri in the water, thrashing like monsters in a feeding frenzy, seeking the ring. "No!" Persini shouted. He still clutched his handful of mud, and now knelt to wash it away. Then he froze. In his hand, covered in mud and silt, was a small round object, an unmistakable shape. Heart pounding, he washed away the mud and stared. In his hand he held a ring of gold, small and simple, with a pure black stone set in it. The stone held a darkness deeper than its color, a power that Persini had only seen glimpses of. He knew, without a doubt, that this was the Ring of Light. For a moment he stood there, totally at a loss of what to do. The Servantiri were still seeking furiously in the water, but in a few moments they'd realize that he had it, and then they'd be after him. "Norin," he mumbled fearfully, then called as loudly as he dared, "Norin!" The Servantiri stopped and looked up slowly, their eyes training on him. Persini stood unmoving, too terrified to move as they started forward, the 3 remaining dragons following with ominous growls. "Norin!" Persini shouted again, this time in true fear. The Servantiri had nearly reached him when the wizard leapt between the 2, sparks shooting from the ends of his staff as he fought back the warriors. 2 of them were killed instantly. The others shrank back, then lunged. 24. The Parley of the Servantiri. It was just after they passed the falls that the Servantiri caught up to the 6 companions. Lamar had been leading them steadily along the east bank of the river as it wound its way closer to the topstorm. Yesterday had been so foggy that Jarris could hardly see anything, but by afternoon the mist had lifted, and they had seen the mountains. They rose above the trees, craggy black peaks, the tallest of which was wreathed in clouds. That, Lamar said, was the topstorm. Lamar had wisely decided to cross the river last night to throw any pursuers off their trail. After that, they had seen nothing of the Servantiri that morning, and had continued down the path. They were walking in single file, moving quickly and quietly. The same bland gray-brown of the shabby trees filled the terrain, and the slight breeze carried a damp, mildewed smell to Jarris's nose. While the domain of Saphacon was said to be a place of wealth, here on the doorstep, the land was wasted with rot and decay, the life drained out of it by the jewel's power. Conversation was limited, and Jarris was so tired he barely had the energy to talk at all. Morel and Rigel were talking in lowered tones up ahead, and Jarris could hear bits and pieces of their conversation. "Maybe they found the ring," Rigel was saying. "Maybe," Morel said, glancing up the river. "The Servantiri could sense that, though, right? So then they'd attack them?" "I'm not sure," Rigel murmured. He shook his head. I would hope that Norin would try to avoid battle, but I'm not sure he'd have much of an option if the Servantiri are searching for the ring, too. Norin could fight them, Jarrus spoke up from behind. He could, Lamar said, but it might not end well. There was a moment of silence. Jarrus wondered suddenly if they would ever see Norin and Persini again. He hoped so, but if the Servantiri caught them, did they have a chance? He swallowed and pushed the thoughts away. Rigel stopped suddenly, looking up. Dragons! There are some dragons! The Servantiri are back! He had barely spoke the words when Jarrus saw the dragons land on the opposite side of the river. 12 of them, each carrying 2 or 3 Servantiri warriors. One of the dragons landed on their side of the river, and the Servantiri on its back dismounted. The warrior spoke, his voice oddly echoing, slow and careful. Jarrus hadn't realized they were capable of speaking, though he guessed that Saphicon could speak through them, to a point. Company of the Jewel, the Servantiri called. We come to parley. Jarrus looked at Lamar doubtfully. Parley? Is this a trap? Might be, but it might be easier to hear them out than try to outrun them, the siren murmured. He looked at Rigel. Go answer them. See what they want. We'll wait here. Rigel moved out of the forest to the shoreline, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Right, then. What's your parley? The Servantiri studied him a long moment, then continued speaking. Lord Saphicon does not care about your travels through his land. All he wants is the jewel. Give it to us, and we will allow you to continue on. Jarrus realized the Servantiri had no idea what their quest actually was, which was why they thought this was a good bargain. But the very essence of this journey was to destroy the jewel, which made giving the jewel away unthinkable. Rigel clearly knew this too, and looked uncertain now. Well, my companions and I will have to talk this over. The Servantiri leader stared at him with empty blue eyes, then nodded. Very well. We will be back in an hour. He mounted the dragon and flew across the river. The companions stepped out onto the riverbank, looking at Rigel. We can't give them the jewel, Neely said slowly. We need the jewel, Morell said. Norin told us to keep it safe, Maya said. I know, Rigel said shortly. He took a breath. We can't give the jewel away, but if we refuse, they'll kill us all in an instant. Maybe we could run? Jarrus suggested, although he knew that wasn't a good option. They had been running so long, they couldn't keep doing this. We'll fight, Lamar said quietly. He stood, green skin battered and bruised, looking at Rigel. We'll fight them back and then run for all we're worth to the top storm. That's the only chance we have. Rigel took a deep breath. All right, that's what we'll do. He looked at Lamar. Do you have a plan for attack? Yes, but I'd like to hear yours first. You've done this sort of thing more recently than I have, the siren said with a crooked grin. Rigel seemed to analyze the situation. Jarrus could almost see the gears turning in his head. Can you shapeshift? He asked Lamar. I'll do my best. Still a bit sore, Lamar said. Try to scare them back a bit. Do something really big, Rigel said. Lamar grinned wider and nodded. Naturally. But that means the Servantiri will come after you once they realize I'm the diversion. The dragons could burn you to a crisp if we're not careful. Right, Rigel said, looking uncertain. What would you have us do, then? Lamar looked at Neely. How's your wing? I can fight, but I cannot fly. Not for a little while longer, Neely said. That's fine. That's good. Try to lure the dragons down to you. Your fire will draw their attention. Dragons hate any creature that can use fire in the same way they can, Lamar told her. What do I do? Morell asked. You and Rigel. You'll be here, covering the retreat. Kill whoever comes after us, Lamar said. Jarrus felt his heart sink a little. Once again, he had been left out of the battle plans. Wait, I can fight. You'll need all the help you can get. Lamar looked at him for a moment, then nodded. All right, then. Stay with Rigel. He looked at Rigel. Wait the full hour. Let them think you'll surrender. Wait until their leader comes back, and our attack will be unexpected. He slipped into the water and swam soundlessly toward the group of servantiri. The hour passed slowly. Jarris's mouth was dry. He sat between Rigel and Morel, which made him feel a little safer. His eyes rested on Maya, who sat across from them beside Neely. She was silent, but Jarris could see the worry in her eyes. "They're back," Morel said quietly a few moments later. The dragon touched down on the beach, and the warrior dismounted as Rigel walked out. "What say you, travelers?" the servantiri asked. Rigel took a breath. "Our mission is to be rid of your master and his objects of power. That is why we cannot give you the jewel. That is why we are on this journey." The servantiri said nothing. It seemed to hesitate, as though registering the answer. Then, in a blur of motion, it drew its sword and hacked at Rigel. Rigel parried the attack and ran the warrior through. In the same second, there was a snarling hiss from the opposite bank as Lamar began his attack. Jarris stared. He had seen Lamar transform into a snake before. Now what he saw was twice that size. The huge green reptile reeled over the servantiri, its hood furled out, forked tongue lashing out from between its mighty fangs. "That's our signal," Morel said as they turned to run. The huge Lamar snake had sent the servantiri into a panic. A few of them were scrambling for their guns, but the snake's coils crushed the weapons in a moment. But the warriors were not taken off guard for long. In a few moments, the dragons had taken to the air. Jarris watched in awe as Neely climbed to the top of one of the trees. Injured or no, she was still a formidable fighter. She fired a blast of flame from her palms at the dragons as they flew above her. That got their attention. Snarling, they rounded on her. Neely shot fire once more, then dropped to the ground just in time. One of the dragons had lunged, its huge claws slashing at the tree. Neely crashed to the ground, shielding her head from the shower of branches, then leapt to her feet. She winced a little as her injured wing was jostled from the drop, but didn't say anything of it. "I think that did it, Rigel. They are angry now." The words were barely out of her mouth when the dragons dove, their claws raking at the trees, belching fire down on them. A wave of heat ruffled Jarris's fur, and he stumbled back, bumping into Maya. The fire licked along the damp boughs of the trees, hissing and crackling. Acrid white smoke filled the air, making Jarris gasp. Throat burning, he grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her back along the riverbank. "Stay low!" he heard Rigel shout. More fire came from above. The trees were too wet to ignite immediately, but the smoke filling the air made it difficult to see or breathe. Through the haze and the blur of tears, Jarris saw the shapes of the dragons dive at them again. Gunfire crackled as the servantiri fired down at them, trapping them between fire and bullets. Neely raised her hands and shot flames back up at them, which caused them to swerve away. But there was no chance the companions could get a clear shot at the servantiri. Morel held the jewel. The rags had fallen off partly, and blue light shone brightly from her hands. It was as if the jewel was letting the servantiri know exactly where to shoot, and now gunfire rained down on them again. For being experimental weaponry, Jarris thought, those guns were formidable weapons. Morel raised the jewel and shouted a spell. The servantiri seemed to lurch slightly on their dragons, but barely reacted. Either Morel had used the wrong spell, or the jewel had chosen not to obey. Jarris somehow suspected both. Rigel and Morel were pinned down 10 feet away, smoke swirling around them, both of them doubled over and coughing. Neely huddled behind them, the bandage around her injured wing hanging loosely, gasping at the pain. There was no sign of Lamar. He was likely still across the river. Had they killed him? The dragons dove again, lighting the trees directly above them. Sparks, branches, and embers rained down on the companions. Smoke filled Jarris's nose and eyes, and he gasped for fresh air. Maya huddled next to him. Her fur was singed in parts, and her breathing was weak from the smoke. "It's okay," Jarris panted to her, shaking her slightly. She straightened weakly, coughing, barely conscious. Jarris's mind was foggy from lack of oxygen. He pulled Maya down beside him, listening to the crackling flames and the coughs from his other companions. This was it. This would be the end. There was no escape. "It's okay," he croaked again, voice hoarse. Maya's eyes opened, fixing on his face at the sound of his voice. The light from the fire reflected on the river water, shining back on her face, turning her blue eyes into sparkling pools. He didn't feel afraid, suddenly. They were going to die anyway. "Maya, I need you to know, A crash cut him off. There was a snarl from above, and a dragon, rider and all, crashed through the trees and lay dead, between them and the others. Jarrus stared at it in shock, squinting through the smoke. The dragon's body was scored with slashes, made by curved and sharp swords. He looked up. Through the haze of smoke and heat, he saw a group of winged, scaled warriors attacking in clean formation, swords flashing, fire glinting in their palms. "It's the Dyrans!" Morell cried, hope coming back into her eyes. Jarrus saw a raven circling above them, a familiar voice coming from it. Lamar was there, alerting the Dyrans to their predicament. He saw the Dyrans charge, meeting the Servantiri and their dragons head-on. The rigid discipline and the training of the Dyran army outweighed the Servantiri easily, and Jarrus could see them fighting calmly, while the Servantiri looked panicked. He got to his feet. The smoke was clearing, and a breath of fresh air reached his lungs. Gasping, he half-carried, half-dragged Maya's still form to the riverbank. A breeze blew down the river, filling his lungs with clean, cool air. He lay there, coughing, too weak to do anything else. The raven landed next to him. Its shape flickered, resuming the shape of Lamar. "Are you all right? Where are the others?" "Trees! The fire!" Jarrus managed to choke, nodding toward the cloud of smoke. He saw Neely stumble onto the shore, dropping to her knees on the riverbank. Lamar transformed into the tall, dark warrior and moved to help Rigel and Morell. Maya still lay unmoving. A sudden terror filled Jarrus. They had been breathing in smoke for several minutes. "Maya?" he gasped, shaking her slightly. Maya's eyes flickered open and she coughed weakly, inhaling a rasping breath of clean air. She coughed again, gasping. Jarrus held her tightly, too relieved to think twice. He let go awkwardly as Rigel and Morell stumbled out of the trees, with Lamar. The Dyran warriors descended from the sky, landing in a semicircle around the companions. King Makana stepped forward. His blue scales were streaked with ash and muck from the battle, but he seemed unhurt. The companions all bowed. "King Makana, you have our thanks," Lamar said. "That is no greeting for friends," Makana told him with a smile, kneeling to clasp the siren's paw. "It is good to see you all alive. We left Flameton a day ago, and hoped we would find you on the way." "The Servantiri, they've been tracking us for days," Rigel said in between coughs. "Then we are very glad to have got here in time," Makana said. He frowned slightly and glanced around. "Where is Norin?" "We had a change of plans," Lamar said slowly. He quickly explained what had happened after they had left Larkin's house. "Sire, did you see either of them on your way here?" Morell asked anxiously. "We did not," Makana said, "though we also flew high above the river, and it could have been easy to miss them." But his face was concerned. Jarrus felt a familiar prickle of fear for Norin and Persini. Makana noticed their worry and added gently, "Do not despair. My guess is Norin will find the ring on his way back to you, and will meet us at the top storm." "Then you march to battle?" Lamar asked him. Makana nodded, looking back in pride at the large group of warriors behind him. There were nearly 70 of them, Jarrus guessed, quite a force to be reckoned with. "We are the advance force. We will provide a diversion for you all to slip into Saphicon's palace and destroy the objects. Then the rest of the army will join us." He looked at Morell unexpectedly. "I also have a task for you, Princess. The Chantrelle have gathered in the mountain passes near Topstorm Mountain. I think they mean to attack Saphicon, but you must persuade them to wait to join us. Together, we will be stronger." Hope had lit in Morell's eyes, and she nodded and bowed. "Sire, it would be my honor." The tall Dyran smiled at her, then his face became serious. "Unfortunately, there is one other piece of news which I carry for you all. Deathcap has pursued you. Our sources report that he has amassed his allies near the mountain pass as well." The mention of the Brownie Prince made Jarrus's mouth dry with fear. But he also realized, in the same moment, that they needed the knife of destruction from Deathcap. If they were going to fight and take the knife, it would have to be now. He looked at his companions. Lamar straightened and nodded shortly. "Right, then. We'll be ready for him." He looked at King Makana. "Sire, I assume you have a plan of attack." Attack? Rigel repeated, looking at him in surprise. Attack, Deathcap? In my experience, it's usually best to strike first, Lamar said with a shrug, and looked back at the king. Well said, Makana said, and nodded. Let us set up camp, and I shall tell you our strategy. 25. The Captives. Persini stepped back and tripped over a tree root as the Servantiri attacked. Norin struck at the closest one, but gave ground as the Servantiri advanced, eyes on Persini. Persini held the ring close, his heart pounding. Norin, I found it, he stammered as they retreated, eyes on the Servantiri. Norin looked at him in surprise, and Persini held it up. The wizard's face was a mix of joy that Persini had found the ring, and of fear that the Servantiri were here to see it. Here, hand it to me. The Servantiri surged forward at the sight of the ring. Norin put it on, made a fist, and lowered the ring at the Servantiri. Doro! Norin shouted, and a ray of energy flared from the stone in the core of the ring. There was no blast, nothing shot from it, but the Servantiri froze, completely still except for their faces, which showed utter fury. That will hold them for a while, Norin muttered, taking Persini's arm as they jogged away. But Norin, I thought they can track us easier when we use the objects. Won't they know? Persini panted as they ran. He was shivering violently from his dip in the river and from fear. They already know where we are. At any rate, there are too many for me to fight alone, Norin told him. He still wore the ring, but held his other hand protectively over it, covering it. What did you do to them? Persini asked, a little in awe of what had happened, and glancing back at the Servantiri. The Servantiri are controlled by Saphicon, but ultimately they answer to the objects, because the jewel is what created them, Norin said. The ring controls time, so I could stop them, freeze them in place. For now. The sounds of the dragons came from the sky. More Servantiri were coming. Norin turned, raising his staff. The dragon dove, dodging the blast. It didn't attack. Instead, it reached out with its claws, seizing Norin by the shoulders and carrying him into the air. Norin! Persini cried in alarm, but then his cry turned to terror. Another dragon had gripped him too, lifting him into the sky. Persini squirmed uselessly in the dragon's claws. He could hear Norin's voice, and wondered if the wizard could use the ring to make the Servantiri leave them alone. The river fell away below him, disappearing into the trees. The Servantiri were going southeast, away from Larkins, taking them to Saphicon. No! Persini cried, then gripped frantically to the dragon's claws as they unexpectedly lurched in the sky. They were going down, slowly. Maybe Norin had used the ring's powers to control them again. But the moment of hope was short-lived. The Servantiri landed, shoving Persini roughly to the ground, where they swiftly tied his arms behind his back. They took both Norin's staff and the ring. Norin's eyes were filled with fury, but there was little he could do. The soldiers kept their weapons trained on him. They would not die like this, Persini thought, and a reckless determination mingled with his fear as he struggled to his feet and lunged at the Servantiri who guarded him. The soldier flung him aside with relative ease. Persini started to get up again when the soldier brought the pommel of his sword down hard on his head. The world swam into blackness. He heard Norin call his name. Then his vision faded away. When Persini's eyes opened, he thought he had been struck blind. He lay on a cold, hard surface, shivering slightly. As his eyes adjusted, he remembered what had happened at the riverbank. The Servantiri had taken the ring. They had taken him and Norin. Persini's heart sank with fear. What would they do now? Where was he? He looked around. He was in a cell, the walls and floor made of sturdy gray stone. Thick cobwebs hung in the corners, their pale color reflecting the weak light that leaked through a small rectangular window above the door. Lantern light, Persini guessed. It was the only light that managed to enter the cell. Other than that, it was completely dark. Persini took a shaking breath, willing himself to be calm, though he couldn't possibly imagine how they would escape or get the ring back. What would happen to him, then? And where was Norin? Norin? He called faintly. His voice echoed in the cell. There was no reply. He was alone. Persini huddled against the wall, fighting the despair that filled him. They were captives of Saphicon. He had no idea where Norin was, and, as far as he knew, Saphicon would kill them both. Tears swam in his vision, and he buried his face in his paws, trembling with cold and sorrow. A sound roused him. Persini looked up sharply at a soft, grating sound coming from the corner. He felt a surge of fear as he saw a hole in the corner. Something was moving toward him. "Hey!" he shouted, hoping to scare the creature away. "Hey," came a soft voice, making him jump. It was quiet and tired, and the accent was slightly familiar. It took Persini a moment to place it. It was the accent of someone from Mata City, the same accent Jarrus and Maya had. The speaker crawled out of the hole. It was a cooper, still young, with handsome dark fur that was now matted and patchy from weeks without proper nourishment or care. His eyes were blue and fixed with interest on Persini. "I've been in here for weeks. Haven't seen anyone else in this cell. These tunnels, they run from cell to cell. I don't think Saphicon knows about them." He moved closer, and Persini saw he was holding a small bundle of wood and flint and steel. "It's freezing in here. Let's get you warmed up." In a few moments, the strange cooper had a small fire going. Warmth filled the cell, and Persini huddled closer to the blaze. "Thank you," he said, looking up at the cooper. "I'm Persini and Mana, of the Chantrell tribe." The cooper bowed slightly. "Pleased to meet you. My name is Hager Grounddrop." In Persini's weary state, he barely registered the name and only nodded. Then, out of nowhere, recognition dawned as he remembered the story Jarrus had told him, and he stared in wonder at the cooper.